Hope you're doing well. Boo Boo Bodacious. What is up, my man? Good GM Hassan. Nice to see you, man. Good morning. Daniel with a good morning team. Indeed. Good morning. Sats for life. Hello. How you doing? Hope you're doing well. Can you talk more about Elon trolling SEC via Doge? We're definitely going to be talking about that today. I did my homework for all you guys on this SEC business and a little bit about what I was mentioning yesterday, because it sort of came at the end of the show and I hadn't rebriefed myself on what's going on with this SEC constitutional challenge thing, and it is live. And boy, oh boy, is it interesting! So we're definitely going to be talking more about Elon. I don't have a ton of focus on the Doge question, but it sort of is within the context, so you'll be able to see it real quick. We'll get to that in a moment. Let me just do a few more of these. Good mornings, Rickster. How you doing? PH with a morning. Justin, good morning, Justin. Hope you're doing well. Hope you're all doing well. I'm putting Sats USD number into my eyes. Helps me start pricing my work. Yeah, that's one of the most important things, boo-boo. It's counting, right? You got to be able to count. We like to count, right? It's all about counting. Louis, good morning, Bitcoin Graffiti. Louis says, glad to catch you live again, folks. Great. We love having you, Louis. It's exciting. CK in the house. There you go, CK. CK, I am trying my darndest to get this on the Bitcoin Magazine YouTube channel, probably in the next day or so. I mean, it's ridiculous. So we'll figure it out. We shall figure it out. But we got other things. You're not here to hear about any complaints about technical stuff. That stuff is boring as heck, right? I got a sunrise confirmation for y'all, right? We got a total sunrise this morning. Excellent sunrise with the smoky horizons here in Quebec. It was nicely colored this morning, I'll tell you. We like smoky horizons when it comes to sunsets and sunrises, but not just confirmation of a sunrise. I got a confirmation that Bitcoin is still running, folks. Another day, another Bitcoin. We're all good. All that we got to do is have a coffee and talk about what's new. Now, as you know, what's this USD you speak of? I'm pausing Plandemic 3 to catch the breakup. Yeah, Plandemic 3 on its way. All right, so as you know, we like to start every morning off with the fakest news we can find. We have some beauties this morning, right? So this is from the Southern Poverty Law Center. And they've decided that Moms for Liberty and a few other parent groups are actually hate groups, right? So they've now added the parental rights groups to the American hate groups situation. And they give a little bit of logic to their decision here. Let me bring it up. I didn't copy the logic because it was just too beautiful. You know, we don't usually do punchlines, right? We're not into the punchlines when we read Moscow Time, but I got to get this one up because it is funny stuff. Well, maybe I didn't copy it. Anyway, they go on to say that, you know, you got to really look after these parents who believe. They even have the thing where it's like the signs you have to watch out for. It's we don't co-parent children with the government. That was like one of the big sticky signs they had to absolutely get everyone aware of, right? We don't co-parent with the government. Be careful of those people. They're probably the most dangerous, right? That's what we were hearing. Well, didn't keep it, but we got more. Don't worry, right? We got more. So it turns out that journalists over in Ukraine are asking the soldiers, you know, if you could just not put the Nazi patches on so much, we're not, you know, shh, no more Nazi patches, guys. Stop the Nazi patches. So Zero Hedge writing, this is an actual headline today. Journalists are asking Ukrainian soldiers to hide their Nazi patches, the New York Times admits. We talked about that New York Times article yesterday. It was excellent. And here's the pièce de résistance for Moscow Time, the fakest news I could find for the day. And it comes from MSNBC. You know, we got to thank the simulation. There's things we have to be grateful for in this world. I'm grateful for MSNBC's ability to provide me with Moscow time stories every morning. Every morning, if I'm feeling in a rush and I can't find fake news, I know where to go. I have a reliable fake news source. And here's their headline today. Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s appeal will also be his ruin. And the tweet that goes along with the headline is being cheered on by Steve Bannon and Alex Jones isn't a winning formula for the Democrat Party. It's not a winning formula for you. But the good news is, they don't know what they're talking about over MSNBC, obviously. One of the interesting things and I've been able to catch up a little bit because it was like, how many hours of RFK content were dropped 2 days ago? It was the Jordan Peterson interview and the Twitter spaces. So there was something like 4 hours of RFK content. And so I still haven't consumed it all, but I've consumed enough of it. A few interesting observations. One of them is that he is certain of his path to victory, right? So it looks like, despite what they say on MSNBC, the winning formula for the Democrat primary and his friendships with Steve Bannon, or his getting cheered on by Steve Bannon and Alex Jones, clearly not bothering him. And what he explained in his path to victory was that he can beat Trump, right? Because he does definitely appeal to a lot of the Trump audience, just as we've seen from the MSNBC article. But more importantly, the only real thing that stands between him and the office, as far as I can tell at this point, is Joe Biden's health. He doesn't have a problem beating Trump in a general election and beating Republicans. And Jack Dorsey said the same thing in his tweet, that he can both beat Biden and Trump. So pretty big endorsement. We talked about that 2 days ago on the spaces. That's why I mentioned it was a big endorsement, having more and more of these folks who have this kind of reach and amplification joining in his campaign. We still see that people don't even know who he is. Like, if you go and ask people who only consume mainstream media, they'll say, the guy with the voice. You mean the guy with the voice, right? So definitely he's making a lot of noise in Bitcoin circles, but it really is, he's making noise in the circles where people don't consume mainstream media. And that's becoming the main cleavage in American culture in a lot of ways. It really is. Do you consume mainstream media, or do you consume decentralized media, or media from different places? What's going on here? Just 1 second. So, which form of media do you consume is sort of the standard right now, right? So if you consume mainstream media, you're generally unaware of things such as RFK's running for president, right? It's sort of a media blackout out there. The best you can get are these articles written by MSNBC. But here's what his path to victory, according to him, looks like. It looks like Democrats realizing that Biden can't beat Trump necessarily. Like, he beat him last time, but it's still a toss-up, right? It's still a toss-up. It depends on how much democracy fortification is allowed to happen this time. We're allowed to talk about the shenanigans in 2020 now, so that's good news, right? But lots of people say that is just to set up another crackdown in talking about democracy fortification and election convenience, let's call it, right? On this, as we get together in the morning, we always put the election question and frame it in ways that Bitcoiners understand, right? Bitcoiners have understood the scaling of the Bitcoin network for a long time, and that there are physical constraints on the scaling of the Bitcoin network. And those physical constraints can be briefly summarized as it's either convenient and easy to use, ergo moves quickly and has fast confirmation times, not 10-minute blocks, larger block sizes, right? So we've understood this debate, and the other one being Bitcoin being credible, right? So in the world of cryptography, we understand the interplay between credibility and convenience. And so we were well prepared for discussions around election integrity. Not to say that we have answers, we just understand the systems that go into having elections. And indeed, you can make choices, right? You don't get to choose both. You don't get to choose convenient and credible. You've got to make a choice. It's either more credible and a little less convenient, or it's more convenient and a little less credible. And that's the engineering constraints Bitcoiners have understood for a long time when it comes to scaling Bitcoin and the system and network that it is. But the same tensions, the same engineering reality exists in the voting system. So Bitcoiners have understood this tension for a long time, and so because Bitcoiners have understood the tension, we've had the right context to understand election shenanigans for a while. So, but that's not the path to victory that RFK is talking about. What RFK ends up expressing on these podcast tours that he's done is simply this: that Democrats will vote for him in the end. And really, all he needs to do is outlast Joe Biden, who is disintegrating before our eyes. And then he'll get the Democrat nomination. Now, there's probably ins and outs and this and that, but his certainty isn't just based on getting past the election shenanigans. It also is based on another observation, and this is something that a lot of people were talking about yesterday, and this is what he had to say about it during the Jordan Peterson interview. So he says that the 2024 election will be decided by podcasts and the kind of media that we do here every morning. Remember, it's all about the real split in America is: do you get your news from the centralized bodies, or do you get your news from other places? And it looks more and more like the people who get their news from the centralized entities, the mainstream media, are the least informed people in America. They only just found out this week that the Ukrainians bombed Nord Stream. They were under the impression for months that maybe Russia did it, right? We don't know, right? So these are the same people that have fallen for the Trump-Russia collusion hoax, the drinking bleach hoax, the January 6th hoax, hoax after hoax, right? Anyone who's followed the mainstream media has just been misled the whole way. We know that, right? We talk about that all the time. But here's his exact quote, right? So this is him. This is the path to victory in RFK talking about podcasts and the media that will go into it. So what he says is, the podcast that Joe Rogan did with Peter McCullough got 40 million views. So Tucker is 10x what CNN gets, and Rogan's audience is potentially 10x what Tucker was getting. So I think the podcasts have the capacity in this election for reaching people and allowing dissident and insurgent candidates like myself to end run the corporate media monolith. And indeed, along those lines, right, what happened yesterday is Tucker Carlson launched his Twitter show, Tucker on Twitter. It's got a nice ring to it. I like alliterations. Tucker on Twitter. And as of this morning, no kidding, it is, I only checked it around 7, so it's probably more than that. I checked at 7 a.m. Eastern time, and he was at 55 or 56 million views of his video. Some absolutely absurd number is what he made it to this morning. And it's only going to go up, right? He was at millions just before he even before he even would have been finished with his time slot on Fox. He was already in the multi-millions. And lots of people talking about the numbers that he got last night and where things are headed. So you get Malcolm Flex, right? If you guys don't follow Malcolm Flex 48, Malcolm _ Flex 48, you got to. He's a super guy. He's part of the whole bro science weightlifting kind of guys, AJ Cortez. There's a whole bunch of these folks out there. He's one of the top ones. If you need an online buddy to work out with or whatever, he does a lot of that content. And he goes on mainstream media quite a bit. So here's what he says. So Tucker Carlson is back, and basically video on Twitter may be hitting a renaissance not seen since the heydays of Periscope and IRL streaming. And he did a great job laying out the facts of our intervention in Ukraine and the holes in the theory around the Crimean I can't pronounce the dam, being blown up by the Russians themselves. I mean, it's not like Ukraine hasn't said that Russia blew up their own infrastructure and tried to, of course, complete nuclear destruction of Europe, which is what some people say could happen with this dam. I don't know the details of the dam thing, by the way. So here he is saying that this is going to be a huge thing, and we're about to see a whole wave of this. He goes, I enjoy the subject. and Tucker being able to propagate messages to counter these things is going to be a big change in the scene. You had General Flynn. You remember General Flynn? He wrote the book on 5G warfare, right? General Flynn. He was the fella who was part of the Trump administration, but who got booted for the Trump-Russia collusion hoax. And so his reaction to Tucker's show last night is the following, right? Tucker Carlson is a truth teller and as authentic a journalist as there is. Nothing can stop him. Tells the truth, exposes the lies, reveals the plans, after which get prepared to be knocked down. What comes next? Get back up and prepare to fight again. It ain't over till we, the people, say it's over. Thank you, Tucker, for continuing to fight the good fight. So a lot of these notes coming in today. War Clandestine, who we love to mention on this show. War Clandestine is an account that's been tracking. Now, remember, we don't know shit about Ukraine, and we're not here to give you details about Ukraine and Russia. Our whole philosophy about Ukraine and Russia is fog of war, can't count on any of the stories, so many spin doctors. You're dealing with the best psychological manipulators in the world going toe-to-toe, the Russians and the Americans going toe-to-toe in that region. So very difficult to trust anything you see, anything, right? So War Clandestine has been following the money in terms of the bioweapons and Ukraine and Wuhan and all that. Now, we still don't know if he's correct. We just think he's pretty honest and isn't lying, we think, and is worth mentioning in our mornings because he says provocative and interesting things. So he had a reaction to what was going on with Tucker last night, and here's his following statement. Do you see what's happening? It's been 2 hours and Tucker is already dwarfing his nightly viewers on Fox News. Once Elon get the ads humming and Tucker starts making stupid money, talking heads will want to go independent and move to Twitter. Media decentralization. Tucker is back like he never left, only this time he is no longer shackled by the commands of an employer. He is free to speak as he sees fit and still has the audience to compete with the legacy mainstream media. Folks, we are witnessing the death of mainstream media in real time. This will serve as a blueprint for all citizen and independent journalists, and soon cable news will become a distant memory. With Elon restoring free speech to Twitter, the MSM are rendered obsolete, and the enemy has effectively lost control of their ability to shape and shift the narrative. This is how humanity prospers over the Orwellian crimes perpetrated against us. This is how we win. And indeed, the whole show, so if you haven't seen it, was about the we found out that Ukraine did blow up the pipeline. A lot of people asking, Vivek, for example, asking, it turns out that Ukraine committed the Nord Stream pipeline. Now, we've been laughing about the idea of Russia doing it for a long time, right? So the news isn't news to us, but here's what Vivek says, because there's actually a way to tie this loose end that looks pretty bad. So Vivek says, it now turns out Ukraine committed the Nord Stream pipeline attack, and Biden knew it was coming 3 months before the attack. Yet afterward, the Biden administration suggested Russia was responsible, and Biden called it a deliberate act of sabotage. Unreal. So just the whole idea that people would be willing to escalate a war with nuclear powers around all of these questions and would blatantly lie to people, with the risks being what some people think they are, nuclear Armageddon. And so that was the whole point of the Tucker show yesterday, talking about how the same excuse is being used right now with the dam. Oh, maybe Russia did the dam, right? Of course, they didn't. It makes no sense why they would destroy infrastructure they themselves own and control. Vivek also came in with a peace plan in the past few days, which looks really interesting. But the most important thing that Tucker actually talked about during the show last night, and he talked about it in his original trailer for Tucker on Twitter that came out a few weeks ago, which is the simple idea that everything you are fed in the news is obviously chosen to be in the news. But the more interesting question is what isn't in the news, what is being excluded, right? We heard about RFK talking about how you can't criticize big pharma on mainstream media the other day. And Tucker, again, just suggesting that the choices, the editorial choices that are made to focus the camera, focus the lens, focus the concentrate the subject matter to one limited thing, and the choices you make to not talk about certain things are even more important, right? So the pharmaceutical thing would be an example of that. And so he was talking about the things we don't talk about and the things that are uh, um, um, outside of the mainstream consciousness now have the potential to be pushed into that mainstream consciousness by people like Tucker, who don't have to listen to any of these edicts about what you can and can't talk about anymore. And so that brings me to the very interesting case of the SEC and Coinbase and Binance and everything that happened yesterday, because there's an interesting little angle here that, again, the mainstream media has never talked about. Now, it is policy wonky. We're getting into a world of boring law, so I'm going to make it simple. I wish I had the whiteboard today. We're going to get the whiteboard back here at this place pretty soon. I should have brought it from the cottage or from the farm, but did not. But nevertheless, we'll do our best. So the thing I was mentioning yesterday when the Coinbase action took place goes back to a case that happened 1 year ago in 2022. And a year ago, so this is an example of the things that no one is talking about, but could change America drastically, right? So if America had real media, I mean, forget about, they would have plenty to investigate on Epstein and everything else that's going on in Ukraine and Russia and Biden. So there is no the list of things that are not discussed by the mainstream media is great, and this is not at the top of the list, but it's one of those things that doesn't look like news, isn't treated like news by the mainstream media, but actually has all the pieces in it to radically alter America in a way that would be recognizable to the vision that Bitcoiners have for the future of America. And here's what it looks like. So this is a case that happened in May 2022. It's currently before the US Supreme Court now. And people are arguing there was just a couple motions filed in the past few weeks. So it's very live, very active. But here's what Vox even said about it last year when it did come out. A wild new court decision would blow up much of the government's ability to operate. What? The U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit's decision in Jarkissi versus the SSC would dismantle much of the system the federal government uses to enforce long-standing laws. So I'm not going to read the awful Vox article about it. The headline was good, but here's what they were talking about. So this is from LexisNexis. LexisNexis is the biggest legal database in the world. It's sort of what you use if you're in law to get a handle on cases and research them. So here's what it says. The rule of Congress cannot circumvent the Seventh Amendment jury trial right simply by passing a statute that assigns traditional legal claims to an administrative tribunal. Public rights arise when Congress passes a statute under its constitutional authority that creates a right so closely integrated with a comprehensive regulatory scheme that the right is appropriate for agency resolution. So the conclusion here of the case is that the court held that Congress unconstitutionally delegated legislative power to the SEC by failing to provide an intelligible principle by which the SEC would exercise the delegated power in violation of the U.S. Constitution, vesting of all legislative power in Congress. Moreover, the statutory removal restrictions on the SEC were unconstitutional because they violated the Take Care Clause of the U.S. Constitution. So the court further held that the SEC's in-house adjudication of petitioner's case violated their Seventh Amendment right to a jury trial because the SEC enforcement action was akin to traditional actions at law to which the jury trial right attached. The petition for review was granted. So indeed, it is going to the Supreme Court now. And it looks like if this actually goes through, that it goes into, so the what these ALJs are let me just see. So they're administrative law judges, right? So administrative law judges, there's about 30 different federal agencies that employ administrative law judges. Now, normally in administrative law, all they're looking at is whether the law was correctly applied, and it's a kind of review situation, right? Is it constitutional? Is it in line with the laws? Now, if it would be like me delegating power over a multi-sig Bitcoin wallet that I don't have power over. You can't do that, right? If you don't have power over it, how can you download the power onto someone else? And that's usually one of the big instruments of deciding administrative law. Did they even have the power to delegate in the first place? Is this power a delegatable power? And in so many ways, what this court is about to say, what this case is about to say, is all of these administrative law judges that have been created in the United States over the past 80 years, guess what? It's 80 years, right? It's all since the Second World War. Now, all of these folks might be unconstitutional, right? It might be unconstitutional. So here's what it looks like. The federal government employs nearly 2,000 administrative law judges, more than twice the number of so-called normal federal judges, right? All of these administrative law judges are, if all of these administrative law judges are declared unconstitutional, and the jarcossy, that's the case, suggests that most, if not all of them, should be, the federal government could lose close to 2/3 of its capacity to adjudicate legal disputes, hobbling enforcement while simultaneously forcing, this is a bit of a Vox thing, forcing vulnerable Americans to wait for years if they will receive their Social Security benefits. So remember, it's okay to oppress if you're going to give some Social Security to people, right? It's okay to break the Constitution if some poor people got to wait long, right? We don't want them to wait long. That's not easy. Waiting long is so boring, right? So all these things about the SEC that people are going on around. Remember, we talk about one of Trump's amazing persuasion abilities. It's called thinking past the sale. What happened with the SEC yesterday and Coinbase and Binance is they're using a Trump tactic. It's thinking past the sale, right? They're saying they have the power to do this in the first place. Meanwhile, behind them is someone saying you actually don't have the power to do any of this stuff. Everyone has the right to a normal court, and everyone has the right to a jury by peers, right? So in this instance, you would have a case where Brian Armstrong and Coinbase should be able to have a jury of peers that would listen to their stories like, we tried to register, we tried to do all this stuff. They use our platform to sell the Bitcoin that they confiscate from criminals. So clearly the Department of Justice isn't totally against Coinbase, right? That they're going to use it. So you can start making those points, because again, that's the point of a jury of peers, is that you get to use sort of common sense and not inside baseball laws that are so far removed from what reasonable, common, normal people would think, right? The reasonableness standard is a real thing in law. What would a reasonable, normal person do in this instance? Is this evidence of them lying, or evidence of them being not forthright? You know, all these things are super subjective, but that's the point of using actual human beings, because they stand in as reasonable people. That's why you have jury selection. That's why there is a jury in the first place. So the good news here is that this whole SEC thing probably doesn't even need to be litigated directly. I think the SEC might lose the power to even enforce what it's doing to Binance and the Coinbase folks. Now, the system is super corrupt, right? But we are dealing with the Supreme Court here, and we've seen Justices Gorsuch, Justice Clarence Thomas is going to be just predicting. This is exactly the type of thing Clarence Thomas loves, right? Like this is a huge amount of overreach that enforcement bodies and administrators have been living with it's been since World War II, that they're able to do this. And that's where you get into the whole decentralization that Bitcoiners have understood from the beginning. So when you get Bitcoiners out there saying, go SEC, get the shitcoiners, get the casinos and all that, well, you're cheering on an unconstitutional body. They're not supposed to be even there in the first place, right? We can, even if you're debating the Howey test, you're already falling into the Trump persuasion tactic of selling, moving past the sale, because you shouldn't even be in that conversation. There shouldn't even be a Howey test to begin with. The Howey test itself is the result of this system gone awry, that you have in-house adjudicators and enforcement actors that can pass Howey test type things and not allow you to use a general civil court with a jury of your peers, then you're clearly outside of the scope of how this stuff was supposed to be thought of in the first place. So, Bruce Fenton bringing up that early Bitcoiners understood this unconstitutionality of a lot of US enforcement, and that really ought to be our target. Right now, Bitcoiners are not directly targeted by what's going on with the SEC and Binance and Coinbase and all that. And indeed, there are gleeful Bitcoiners out there. But remember, it's not even the right argument. It's not even the right argument, right? Arguing whether or not the SEC should go after shitcoin casinos and whether shitcoin casinos are good or not, you're already off the reservation. You're already making the wrong debate. The real debate is, can the SEC even do this in the first place? No. Early Bitcoiners were not interested in SEC enforcement and were not feeling lucky because their coin didn't get caught up in it, right? So Bruce Fenton bringing that point up, saying, attention Bitcoiners who support the SEC government action against Coinbase. I genuinely believe that it is wrong. Please watch this explanation covering, and this is what he talks about, the liberty and anarcho-capitalist origins of Bitcoin. That's how I got into this whole thing, right? Ways regulation does not work. Libertarian 101, a reminder that state action is backed by bonds. But here's the interesting observation that I had, and it even comes back to Bitcoin 2023 and even stuff I'm doing in Ottawa here in Canada. So here's the thing. The people... We've talked a lot about the human resources that have come into Bitcoin over time, the human capital and when they come in. And it's been my number one predictive model for understanding where Bitcoin's headed and understanding what's going on in the world. And it just looks like this, right? So the original Bitcoiners are the anarcho-capitalists, the cypherpunks, the people who are on the cypherpunk mailing list, the folks who understood that cryptography was the tool to liberate humanity from everything that's been going on since World War II. Indeed, the reason why cryptography was made illegal after World War II was because of the insights these people had and were continuing to propagate right up until Satoshi mailed out the Bitcoin white paper to the mailing list. So those were the first, right? So those you can just kind of imagine are the foundation. But the next ones were the political folks, right? Once the anarcho-capitalists and a lot of the Ron Paul 2008 gang, a lot of the Occupy Wall Street gang, a lot of the more libertarian crowd who were completely disillusioned now by American politics of the right in particular, I would include myself in that category. All the anarcho-capitalists and more libertarian type people that had grafted themselves onto right-wing politics were realizing it wasn't going to work, right? It wasn't going to work. And we were just going to continue to be used the same way Republicans or conservatives in Canada will use evangelical Christians or any other group to further their benefit, but then not really help them, right? So a lot of people were waking up to that. And that's why we joined Bitcoin, because we said, okay, this isn't even... we're not going to sit around and argue things like the Howey test anymore. We got to destroy it, right? We have to completely remodel what's going on, and that's the way to do it. So those were the second group that came in and added to Bitcoin. And so here's the, and then after you get the Wall Street, the non-sentimental people, the artists, the all the web developers, computer people, all of them came after, right? And they're all still valuable, predictive, useful, all that kind of stuff. But here's the interesting point. When I left politics to join the Bitcoin revolution, to join what we're doing, no one even knew what I was talking about, right? No, I got the Bitcoin study going in 2013 and in the Canadian Senate. And by the time, so by the way, for those of you who don't know, I am trained as a lawyer, never worked a day of law in my life other than a little bit at a firm in Japan. So never wanted to be a lawyer, but I got this job out of law school in the Senate Banking Committee in Canada, which is where I learned a lot of this stuff. So When I got the Bitcoin study going in 2013, and then I quit my job in 2015, still no one knew what I was talking about, right? When I would tell people in politics, oh, I'm going to quit to go do this Bitcoin thing, first of all, it was a huge sort of prestige uh, downgrade, right? I went from having a fireplace and a couch in my office and a secretary and all of these things to and not, I was already working from home back then, so it's not like I had to go in and do useless stuff. So it was a really great job, right? Loved it. But I decided at the time to go sort of work above a pizzeria and with a Bitcoin ATM that sold to all the drug dealers that needed liquidity at the time, and we would just kind of not look. But that's fine, right? I loved it. It was one of the best decisions I ever made. But here's the interesting thing: how quickly this stuff comes full circle, and how quickly we've grown, and how fast it's all happened. When I go back to Ottawa today, or if you go to DC, the main leader of the party that I used to work for in Canada, the Conservatives, the leader now is Pierre Poilievre, a Bitcoiner, right? You look at the American election, you've got RFK, Vivek, Tulsi all came to the Bitcoin show. Everyone there sort of has an opinion on Bitcoin that's running against the challengers. So not Trump or Biden, but everyone below them seems to have an opinion on Bitcoin now. DeSantis, all of these folks, right? So just look at how far Bitcoin has come, even in the political sphere, right? And I continue to predict it's going to be the main fulcrum, the main deciding factor, the most attention on any subject in the 2024 election is going to be Bitcoin. It's going to be CBDCs, Bitcoin, the role of the deep state intelligence communities, the role of the Federal Reserve, the role of all of these things. And so if you look at how quickly things have changed, now when I go back to Ottawa, everybody wants to talk about Bitcoin, right? If you go to DC, everybody wants to talk about Bitcoin. It's the biggest subject going for people who are paying attention. And if you think about how quickly things did change actually, and you understand that it's coming full circle, where it was just this little side thing in politics, it's now going to become one of the major deciding things. And just think about the amount of lobbying power, the amount of conversation that's going to come around what is a wasteful movement by the SEC, because they're probably going to lose their power to do this stuff anyway, right? Their corruption is going to get exposed, and you're going to have a whole bunch of people who are way more educated than they ever were on the division of powers, the proper calibration of US decentralization, a proper understanding of centralized overreach. And one of the great things that we have to guide us through that is RFK. Weirdly, RFK's granddaddy set up the SEC. Did you know that? Did you know that RFK's granddaddy built this whole mousetrap? And, he was one of the biggest shitcoin slingers of the 1920s, in the roaring 20s. He was just a slinging coins and making a fortune. He would take his, he owned a bunch of pharmacies, and pharmacies are where you bought the pieces to make alcohol, right? So he was a big bootleg seller. And you were able to get, they would sell you non-alcoholic beer, and then you'd add the rubbing alcohol or the pure alcohol to it. And there was all these kinds of concoctions to brew. And so he had a lot of cash flow like any other more or less drug dealer. And he needed to put it somewhere from this business because he was legally raking in the cash. So he went and started slinging coins on Wall Street and did great. Amazing, right? That's where a lot of the family wealth actually comes from, the combination of bootlegging and SEC shitcoinery, and previous to the SEC. So, but that's the reason why they gave him the SEC. They knew he knew all the tricks, and he was the schemiest, scammiest guy going. And, my impression, I don't know enough about him, but my impression is his scamminess was sort of the endearing good kind, right? It's like, well, you let me scam a little, I'll do a lot. So here's the thing. RFK, right, having all of this control, like even just his understanding, here's what I learned from RFK from the Spaces thing even on nuclear energy, right? Now, normally I cannot be dissuaded from nuclear energy, and he did not dissuade me from nuclear energy, right? Just so you know. But trying to figure out what trying to figure out what um, um, trying to figure out what his criticisms for nuclear energy were, and what made them different. So I can't be dissuaded from nuclear energy, that's for sure. But listening to him saying, "Well, the insurance is a big problem," right? I never heard of that. I never heard of insurance being a major problem for nuclear energy, but he's right. It actually is when you look into American legal responsibility and all of these things. So I think it's a solvable problem. But here's what he actually said about what makes nuclear. And I don't think he's so aware of the small modular nuclears, because his argument against nuclear wasn't just the insurance. It was well, what we need to do is decentralize the grid. We need every American who can generate energy to generate that energy. And then we need to be able to tap back into the grid, right? So you need to be able to sell into the grid. We got to remake the US electrical grid. Now, here's someone who actually gets it. Like, that's all we need. And that's where Bitcoin home mining comes in. That's where the ability for indeed each individual house to generate its own energy. I mean, that's what I'm doing in Vermont, right? I'm getting some Tesla power walls. I'm getting a little bit of solar, a little bit of wind because I have it. So we're going to be off the grid there. And indeed, if I have extra power, which I will, I'll mine some Bitcoin. And if I have even more, I'll sell it back to the town. You have that actually in Barbados right now, right? Barbados has, because they have this unlimited sun situation. It's always sunny. They had incentivized that years ago that you could sell into the grid. So they already have this grid. This is not rocket science. It's not a brand new thing. Other places have it. And when he comes in, RFK, and starts talking about, if we could probably just do it if we have a bit of storage and a bit of solar and a bit of wind, and everyone learns how to share with each other, problem solved. We wouldn't need these huge nuclear reactors. So that is probably the best argument against the large proliferation of Gen 4 nuclear that I've ever heard. Now, what I propose all the time is the small modular nuclear reactors. Now, I'm not sure he's paid much attention to them, but who knows, right? Who knows? I still think he'll be able to gravitate towards that argument and capture it. But just having someone who is so knowledgeable in the law, and that's really what came across in all these interviews for me with RFK, is that, like myself, he's practiced law way more than I have, but just having that understanding, I'm pretty anti higher education in general, by the way. But I always recommend that law degrees are super worth it, right? Because you just learn how to see government, society as an engine. You understand the engineering that goes behind building countries and states. You can see it like a motor. And that's a really good skill, actually. And he clearly has that skill, right? That to me, law remains the only and greatest liberal arts education left in the marketplace of degrees and higher education. And because it's just giving you the actual, like, here's blueprints for a motor, tell me if the motor was built properly, right? That's more or less what you're doing in law. That's what the SEC case is all about, right? Did you build the engine according to the specs that you were told you can build an engine to? Yes or no? Clearly no. So I think the Supreme Court is going to come down on this stuff. I think it's going to go into the hands of someone who does have a very subtle knowledge of the legal ins and outs and workings of America, like someone like RFK. So I continue to predict he's going to win. I think his path to victory is actually the shortest of any candidate. He just has to get by Biden. I don't think Trump's going to be trouble for him. Biden against Trump, big problem, right? So you get the people who hate Trump. It's going to be very easy for them to get behind a candidate who they know can beat Trump. Who are the Biden voters more afraid of, Biden or Trump, right? Do they want Biden more than they fear Trump? No, right? Most of his votes, and I'll even go ahead and say, I believe he could have got, I'm not saying he did get 83 million votes. I will say he could have, because the hatred for Trump is so large. It's not the love for Biden. It was the hatred for Trump. And that hatred can sort of go away. I think there's a group of people that will never forget it. Now, again, I love Trump for the humor. I love Trump for the mind. I love Trump for his ability to smell scammers and frauds. And I love his forthrightness and his inability to self-censor, really, I think, is my favorite quality of him. But he doesn't have like a subtle legal mind. Like, this is not what we're dealing with here, right? And we probably need someone who can at least be crafty and surgical as we deconstruct USA Inc., which is the next cycle of growth for America. You need someone who could control, demolish USA Inc., the federal government, Washington, D.C., and everything that was built after the Second World War. And he's the guy, right? He is the guy. So I think he's going to win. I really do. I think the path to victory is really short. It really all comes down to Joe Biden's health. That's it, right? Because he'll get, RFK will get all the Democrat votes if he gets the nomination. They won't even care, right? These people will just vote Democrat. So that's really all he needs, right? They're going to vote for him if he gets past Biden. Can he get past Biden? They're going to cheat. They're going to lie. They're going to do MSNBC articles on him, but it won't matter because he's correct. The path to victory are the podcasts. It's the reach. More people are going to learn about him through all of these much more trustworthy word of mouth situations than the mainstream media could ever produce. And all he needs to do is beat Biden. I mean, it's doable, really doable. You know, Biden is falling apart. I don't know how many masks they have to create fake Bidens, but it's not going to work when he gets put in a corner. Now, there's other good news out there, and you're going to see that this whole thing that RFK is talking about, even as far as decentralizing the grid, like I mentioned in Barbados, here's something happening in El Salvador, right? This is one of those instances where it's, you know, you're talking about, oh, there's so many bad things going on in the world. There's a dam in Ukraine and nuclear fallout and what's going on. But out of all of that confusion, you get these great news stories, and this is one. So El Salvador raised $1 billion to build one of the largest Bitcoin mines in the world, powered by geothermal, solar, and wind. And there's going to be a 241 megawatt system out of that, and that will be mining Bitcoin. On the same day that El Salvador did what? Got rid of most of its bureaucracy. Now imagine, that's exactly the scenario that RFK is kind of talking about. We're talking about getting rid of the types of bureaucracy that would be these administrative law judges, the ALJs that were part of the bureaucracy, because that's the problem, right? The whole constitutional complaint about these SEC folks is that they are more or less bound to the administration and bureaucrats. They're bureaucrats, right? A judge is not a bureaucrat. They're not supposed to be the same thing. And so the whole crux of the SEC case is judges as bureaucrats. And what's going on in El Salvador with this whole, sort of changing of the guard over there, with firing all of these bureaucrats and embracing, a stripped, and so that's one of the things that people said he had to do in El Salvador, because, or that Bukele had to do in El Salvador, because he's already shrunk a lot of the elected officials. So he last week got rid of all these extra mayors and all of these extra senators and extra congressmen, and representation because of corruption was like 8 elected people per human, like a totally made up number, but it was an absurd amount of representation, an absurd amount of people you voted for, and most of it was corruption. And so he got rid of those, and a lot of people, you had Francis Pouliot, you had a lot of Bitcoiners saying, that's good, you're getting rid of some of the people, but you've got to go to your bureaucracy because your real snakes are in your bureaucracy. And if you don't get rid of them, they're going to subvert you. There's going to be leaks. There's going to be all of this kind of stuff. And so what does he do? Within days, he's gotten rid of them, right? So El Salvador now shrinking its bureaucracy, shrinking the parasites and the predators that are on top of that have been sucking the country dry for years. I'm trying to find, I had the piece somewhere. Well, anyway, that's what happened in El Salvador. So El Salvador getting rid of its bureaucracy, getting rid of a lot of these elected folks, and embracing a smaller type of government. Now, here's another one when it comes to good news that is under the radar, that is super relevant for Bitcoiners and is going to help assuage most of our worries about what's going to happen in America going forward after USA Inc. comes down, right? Because if USA Inc. comes down, is it going to be years of misery before we build things back up? Well, here's good news, right? This is from U.S. manufacturing and construction spending. The U.S. manufacturing construction boom is massive. Historic increases in this is from Joe Politano. Historic increases in computer/electronic manufacturing thanks to the CHIPS Act, and massive increases in transportation equipment, cars, electric vehicles, thanks to the Inflation Reduction Act. Now, I don't know if it was the rules, the laws that Biden passed, or the spending, or but it looks like we're getting back the chips manufacturing, which we're going to need, right? We're going to need chips, and we're going to need all that stuff. Now, I have not done an audit of the system. I do not know if it's working, but we made a prediction that manufacturing is going to come back to America, and that when America opens its eyes from this era that it's been in, it will be in great shape. And if we continue to get someone who is talking about what is going on in El Salvador, new energy sources, Bitcoin mining, and decentralization of the grid with other people buying in and pushing capacity into the grid on their own, as well as a manufacturing boom in America, well, we're going to be out of all of this trouble, right? We're going to be all out of trouble. So let me see what the comments say, and I will talk a bit more about it. Okay. Happy Wednesday. Everybody knows experimental. Sorry, I didn't know they went back this far. 1 second. Okay. I really think he can get the Dems votes that had become Republicans. The woke will never vote for him, though. Again, if he is the Democrat candidate, they will. They will. They will. Good morning, world. Good morning, Joe. Are you saying oh, that's oh no. Thanks, AR. I won't read it out loud. We don't need digital currencies. We already have digital currencies. I'm not supposed to drink bleach. Everybody knows only experimental. It's basic biology. U.S. engages in proxy war. The simplest answer is the U.S. did it and used Ukraine as the fall guy. Yeah, absolutely. But only after blaming Russia. Smash the like. But Brian says, I gently press the like. I'll take a gently press the like as well, guys. You don't need to smash. You can gently press. You can gently press. That's fine. 20 subs away from 1,000 subs. 1,000 subs mean no one reaches Satoshi Universal. Let's make it happen. Yeah, I've got some pretty good stuff I've been working on, guys. I have you can see, I'll push it over. That's another computer setup there, and that has become the Satoshi publishing setup. So it's coming any day. T-shirt idea, Mama, don't let your babies go to do crypto. Yeah, I actually had a onesie sent to my daughter born in 2017 that said, "This baby loves Bitcoin." It's so cute. Yeah, so cute. So I've got her in that. Jeremy, yeah, it was pretty cool. The fireplace was cool. The couch was cool. We're doing our best, Jeremy. We're doing our best. Fiat is for drug dealers and money laundering can be. Yeah, that's what I mean, guys. You know, Jeremy here mentioning that Pierre Poliver, now a Bitcoiner. Indeed, that's what makes it interesting for me, because when I left, people just didn't even. It's not even that they're like, "Oh, you're leaving politics to go into some other field." They didn't even understand what I was talking about, right? So it makes it pretty interesting that it's become the main subject. So you know that's it's ego, but it's cool. Gives me goosebumps. Intergenerational karma. Yeah, honestly, that intergenerational thing is super important. That his granddaddy set it up makes him more likely to understand where it went wrong and how to talk about where it went wrong and fix it than anyone else in the world, maybe. And I think he can do it, right? I think he can do it. There's a company called Radiant, which provides nuclear energy through trucks. I didn't know that, Bob. I'll check that out. Love him or hate him, Tucker's strategy right now, it's the best, isn't it? Isn't it great? Isn't it great? If he can start to roll things back to how they were before the 1963 coup d'etat instigated by the hit on his uncle, that would be fun to watch. And that's the story that we're seeing. That is it right there, as Daniel just said. The first time I mentioned RFK here was in that instance. It was that there will be narrative closure on what happened in 1963 that knocked America out of its golden age, that set the stage for this coming turning. And the fourth turning frame, amazingly, and that's what I mentioned that day when RFK first started talking about the death of his uncle and his dad, was precisely that. It was, look, the universe wants the most entertaining outcome. The first turning ends with the assassination of JFK, and the fourth turning into the fourth turning crisis era begins with the financial crisis. You put those two things together and you get the way out of this era. You get the way into the new golden era. And it just so happens RFK didn't have the Bitcoin thing back then, but he's fixed the money thing since. And so he's got both pieces to get the unraveling taken care of, to get the awakening taken care of, and to get the financial crisis taken care of finally, and to put us back onto the path where his dad and his uncle were first elected in the golden age of America. And so it's an amazing bridge, and the SEC's involvement in it is important, and he understands it better than anyone because, again, it was his granddad. Do you have any knowledge of Charles Eisenstein? He's working on RFK Jr.'s team advising. I have followed him and read his stuff for a long time. Really great stuff. Yeah, I do know him. I booked him for a show a few years ago. And the collaborative finance stuff. Yeah, he's a gentle and good guy. A little flaky, maybe, if I was to give him one criticism. But I'm guilty of the same thing. So I'm not. It's not like, oh, he's not a good guy. He's been involved in some shitcoinery, but you know, I still think his heart is in the good place, and he should be fine with Charles Eisenstein. I can't say I'm a fan of Charles Eisenstein necessarily, but I don't have anything against him. And if he's on RFK's team, I think it's a plus. I think it's a plus. He's a good communicator. You know, maybe not. I don't know if Bitcoiners would drive with him so much because he's not really a hard money guy necessarily. But I don't really have anything bad to say about him other than what I just said, is that he can be a little flaky, but so what? You know, will be taken down by the SEC. Yeah, I mean, I can see that being the case. There are so many scams, like legit, absolute scams, that I would imagine there's plenty there for the SEC to be busy with. What I think is going to happen, so all that will happen is that the SEC will still have the ability to, that it will have an ability to, there still will be like enforcement law. It'll still be able to pass laws, right, and pass rules and regulations. That power is delegatable. They just can't adjudicate on them. They can't enforce them. The enforcement will be pushed off to a civil court, which means that the laws will have to be written in a way that most of the people in those courts can understand them. That's what went wrong, right? The people in the courts, in the administrative law courts that the SEC created, those administrative law judges, that's how things got so estranged from reality. You were talking inside baseball. They got more and more specified, more and more granular, more and more estranged from what a normal judge and legal practitioner could understand, right? So specialists among specialists, which is why those judges, those lawyers even had such a great reputation before anyone had opened their eyes to this stuff. When I went to law school, if you were a securities lawyer in the United States, oh, you were a brain surgeon. You were so great. All it meant is that you had the ability to handle the tediousness of the way they wrote the laws for a it's like reading technical language intended for a hyper technical audience. That's what it became. And that's not really what it's supposed to be. So that, to me, will be recognizable by RFK as a major problem. But it isn't even RFK who's got to solve it. The Supreme Court's going to destroy this. Mark my words, it's not making it anywhere. This dog ain't going to hunt. The SEC enforcement is done. It's not going to make it out of this cycle. It's not going to make it out of the Supreme Court. And so you don't need to argue how we test and what are we going to do about the shit coins and the casinos. All of them are going to get out of this. Some projects, yeah, sure. If a normal judge, a normal trial by jury and a normal civil judge can see it and say, well, this is a scam, it's still going to be a scam. It's still going to be a scam. They're not going to be able to use these really cute provisions created with hyper speciality by the SEC to be enforced by their own staff. That's what's not going to happen. So I'll check into these Radiant trucks, guys. Yeah, I saw it. Well, Balaji was offered, the world would be very different today. That Balaji was offered by Trump FDA. He would have been in charge of the pandemic had he taken it. So the world could already have been extremely different. It was big news in the old days. I remember in 2016 when Balaji went dark for like 2 years, right? Balaji disappeared for like 2 years. And it was around the time that Trump was talking about nominating him as the head of the FDA. And it would have meant that the pandemic wouldn't have happened. We would never have had it. It would have been handled completely differently. And a lot of decisions were made at that time that were bad, right? So in the end, Balaji went to Coinbase after his company Earn was bought by Coinbase. All kinds of rumors around that. We'll talk about that another time because I don't know. I just know some funny stories about that time and place. It's related. No, I don't think so. No, Charles Eisenstein is more of he's not a hard math guy at all. He's like a spiritual kind of fella. But again, like I'm love the Charles skepticism. It's not skepticism is. He's fine on a team. I wouldn't think of it as I don't know. I wouldn't make him my point guard. I wouldn't make him my starting pitcher if it was a baseball. He's not my quarterback, right? He's like a backup quarterback kind of guy. But yeah, I'm glad his temperament seems to fit with the RFK team, so that's good news. That's fine. All right, team. I hope you enjoyed everything this morning. We're going to see you again tomorrow, right? And we're going to have another, I think, beautiful sunrise. And I think Bitcoin's still going to be running tomorrow, guys. I think so. And you should be getting, we should be hitting the 1,000 subs, but I'm already preparing everything. So you're gonna like some good entertainment value coming, guys. The channel's got a whole new feature coming up. All right. Thanks for coming, everyone.